Hey, what's up, everybody? I'd like to welcome you back to the Audio Programmer Podcast. And here we have a very special guest this week. This is Mark Watt from Delta V Audio. How's it going, Mark?
Hello, Josh. I'm good.
Great. So Mark has the distinction of being the first person that's actually come to the podcast with a professional mic setup. So congratulations, Mark. So we're definitely going to have no hitches, no technical hitches this time. So just a few announcements before we get started. First thing that I want to announce is that enrollment is starting once again for our pal Matt Katz's C++ for audio programmers course. And be sure to sign up via the website, www.theaudioprogrammer.com. And also, if you're finding these podcasts entertaining and educational, be sure to check us out on Patreon, and the address for that is patreon.com/the audio programmer. So Mark, where are you coming from? Where are you right now?
I'm in my flat in central London, so if there are any traffic noises going past, then apologies for that, but maybe we can sort of filter it out later.
That's all right. We can. Yeah. I'm sure we can filter it out or figure something out. But you're not from. You don't sound like you're from London, though.
No, I'm Scottish.
You're Scottish. Okay, what part of Scotland?
Northeast.
Oh, okay, cool. Is that
my accent's kind of become neutralized a bit from talking to a lot of Europeans and in my job, so I still have the accent from back home. When I go up and visit back home, it switches on pretty heavy. Yeah. I don't think you want to hear that in the podcast, though.
I'm not sure if I would understand it. I've been up there a couple times. Is that up near Loch Ness, or is Loch Ness?
No, it's right on the northeast. It's a town called Fraserburgh.
Okay, and where's Loch Ness?
Fraserburgh.
Where's Loch Ness at?
Oh, Loch Ness. That's over towards the west.
Okay, so Mark has actually created a plugin, a synthesizer. It's actually a very different kind of tool from anything that I've ever really seen before, and it's called SpaceCraft, and it's kind of a granular. I would describe it as a granular synthesizer type of plugin, and it's really been taking the plugin world by storm. And one of the most exciting things is that it was released already for iOS, and then now it's released. It's been recently released for desktop. So, Mark, can you just tell us a little bit just about that, and then we'll go into detail about that a little bit later. So, tell us about just what is SpaceCraft, and maybe just the initial concept behind it.
Okay, so it's SpaceCraft Granular Synth. Mm-hmm. It's been out on iOS for a year now, exactly a year. It's basically, to describe the app, to summarize it, it's two granular engines where you have like two samples. And the idea behind it is it's a very simple, focused interface with a single page design. So you don't need to sort of configure anything or go into menus. You don't need to map anything. It's all kind of there and done in the form of XY pads, basically.
Yeah.
So you just kind of go in and start playing, and it produces quite an an inspiring kind of sound. And people tell me that they find it sort of like there's instant gratification when they start playing it, which is great to hear. They find it, they can just kind of explore when they play it, and they find that they sort of go on an adventure and find sounds that way.
Yeah. So the first time that I saw it, I remember seeing you around the forums. I think I'm not sure if I might have met you first on the Audio Kit forum on their Slack. And then I think I saw you in our Discord chat, and so I saw your name around. I knew that you were working on the synthesizer, and then I just remember there was a point about a year ago where everybody was talking about it. Richard Devine, who is one of the most famous sound designers in the world. He sound designs for Google and does all kinds of exciting stuff. And I remember he was going crazy about it, and he posted a video about it, and everybody was just really using it.
To put things into perspective, for when I released the iOS app, I didn't actually tell anyone about it. It just I released it and just waited to see what would happen.
Hold on 1 second. Sorry about this. It's my dogs.
That's all right.
Guys, stop it.
Are they your dogs?
Yeah, they're mine. I have 6 of them. I have 6 dogs. I have 5 chihuahuas.
Okay.
And,
I thought you were talking to your neighbors and said, "Guys, stop it!"
No,
shut your dogs up.
Come on, Toast. No, I have 5 chihuahuas and a French bulldog. And,
okay.
Yeah. So sometimes and the chihuahuas don't like the French bulldog, so whenever she's going across, they just sit there and yap at her. So it's one of those things. But go ahead. Go ahead with your story.
So yeah, to put things in perspective, when I released on iOS, I didn't actually tell anyone. It appeared on the App Store, and then I waited to see what would happen. And the first thing that happened was the Audio Bus forum. Somebody on the Audio Bus forum discovered it. And the Audio Bus forum is sort of the main forum for iOS music.
Yeah.
And so I had this very surreal experience, one of many surreal experiences in this whole sort of adventure, where I just saw this thread start growing and people start commenting on it and saying, "What's this instrument? Where'd it come from?" And so that was a bit of a roller coaster ride for me. That was an interesting weekend, that one.
Yeah.
And so I was following all the sort of trying to answer questions and things, and then it sort of just kind of went viral from there in a way. And I don't know if I was very fortunate maybe with the way that happened, and it just kind of started getting a lot of interest. It was turning up on Instagram a lot, and I had just created a brand new Instagram account for doing this.
Yeah.
And that started kind of blowing up as well. And so there was a number of very surreal experiences that I had, sort of starting to gradually get into this audio development world. One of the one that you mentioned was when Richard Devine posted a video of him playing on it on the iPad. I remember when I saw that, my jaw just kind of hit the floor.
Yeah.
It was just so surreal because I know Richard Devine. I've been using his presets in various instruments, and his name's all over the place, and I love his sound design work, and to have that happen was kind of a turning point, I think, to some extent, because there was a huge surge in interest after that. So yeah, I'm very grateful for that happening.
Amazing. And was there a reason that you didn't really tell anybody when you put it on the App Store? Did you feel yeah, go ahead. Did you feel that I just want to put this out there, just see what happens, or did you feel like, this isn't I don't know if anybody's going to really like this, or what was
I didn't really know if people would like it, because I knew that I liked it. I kind of designed an instrument that I wanted to have.
Yeah.
But I didn't know. I thought it might be a bit simplistic for people, and I thought maybe people would think it's kind of like a toy in some ways. And the first version that released was a lot more simple than what it currently is now, in terms of it didn't have MIDI, certainly didn't have MPE, it didn't have presets or state saving, didn't have any of those things. It was just sort of bare bones, and obviously those were features people were asking for. So what I did was, through the year since then, really, I had great feedback from the community, and in my spare time I've been working on this this instrument. It's always been my sort of a spare time thing that I've been doing from the start. And so, yeah.
Wow. And I'm curious about that cycle where you released the plugin, but it didn't, because I say this from my own perspective, that I'm working on an audio app right now, and one thing that I think about is, it needs to have state saving, and it needs to have this, and it needs to be fully featured, and it needs to have all these things. If you could go back again in time, would you have released it the same way, kind of bare bones and
Yeah, I would do it the same way, because it's a really I don't know what the experience with other types of app would be, but for SpaceCraft, the state saving was really challenging. Mainly because there's very large audio files. There's like 4 minutes worth of audio per preset, so I couldn't save the audio in the actual preset. And so I knew I would have to eventually implement a system where there would be separate audio files and presets that would share the audio files. And that it turned out that it was a massive job doing that. It was pretty horrible, actually, coding that up. It was really it wasn't a very enjoyable part of the development, but it absolutely had to be done.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty happy with what I have now.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't have wanted to go through that whole process.
Yeah.
For the initial app, because I didn't really know that it was actually going to be successful. So what I released was really what do you call it? A minimum. What do you call it?
MVP, minimum viable product.
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I went for the whole minimum viable product, and I think it was the right move.
Yeah.
And also, I kind of thought as well that I wouldn't really know what would need to be done to it until I would see how the community used it. And the community they've been incredible, actually, with the feedback that they've given me. Everyone's been so sort of positive and helpful, and from a lot of the guys from the Audiobus forum, actually, I have a lot to thank them for what they've done in their support.
Wow.
Shout out Trevor Llewellyn, my number one beta tester.
Yes, awesome. And so do you feel that being able to come out with features over the course of time helped kind of keep the momentum for the synth going as well?
Yeah, I think it did, actually. Because it helped keep the buzz going. You use social media, you post something. Social media has been really, I mean, you can never know what it would have been like without it, but I get the feeling that mainly Instagram, actually, has been a huge sort of drive in getting SpaceCraft known.
Yeah.
So I put a lot of effort into that. I don't have that many posts, but I've been very sort of active and looking to see what's happening with SpaceCraft on Instagram.
And the design of it, one of the, because I popped it open. Thank you for sending it to me, and I had a little play around with it. And one of the most interesting things to me was that there are no real controls that tell you what is what and what it's actually doing. But I actually really enjoy that, because I like the kind of sonic exploration, and I don't really know what this is doing to the sound, but let me just twiddle some knobs and just add some things, add some parameters. Was that the initial concept? What can you tell me about the initial concept first?
Yeah, so one of the things I wanted for SpaceCraft was for it to be very visually sort of beautiful, and I didn't really want to have the text on there describing what the things would do. I wanted it to feel sort of alien, and it's more the only text that's on there, I think, is the word input, because that's the most important button for a new user to see and to know this is how I get audio into SpaceCraft. And being a granular synth, that's a pretty important feature. So other than that, it's really just for aesthetic reasons. For the visual experience.
Yeah. And another thing that I like is that when you actually stop your DAW on the desktop version, that it actually tells you, hey, the DAW is stopped. That's why there's no sound coming out, which I think is really great feedback.
Yes, that only happens when the sync mode is on.
Yeah,
actually,
yeah.
But yeah.
So I'm very interested in hearing about how this kind of came to be a project for you. So how did you get started, and how did you kind of start getting into audio programming in general?
So it's been a really wonderful experience for me in my life to get into audio programming. I'm so happy that I've done it. It's been an amazing adventure, and it really it's a thing that I do in my spare time. But it's like the main thing I do in my spare time. It's my passion.
Yeah.
So how I started getting into this was I would create ensembles in Reactor. Maybe I was getting into that for the last like 6 years, on and off, and I was coming up with various contraptions and different sort of things that I found were fun for me to play, because I wanted to use it in my own music, which I still haven't actually made yet, but yeah. I will at some point, hopefully, once all the coding gets finished. So I was making it Reactor ensembles, and Reactor is an incredible sort of framework for coding instruments in. Of the various things that I experimented with, one was granular synthesis, and Reactor actually has built-in granular synthesis sort of blocks, like the grain cloud block and things, and so anyone can go in and sort of wire up a grain cloud block and do sort of basic granular synthesis there. But I decided I wanted to have a different type of approach to the grains firing and how the pitches were controlled. So I wrote my own granular sort of sequencer from scratch in Reactor. Which would sort of it's essentially what SpaceCraft is now. It fires the grains in a predetermined sequence with a specific. It's kind of like on a train, and the frequency is determined by the grain control panel and the length. And the only thing that varies between the grain firing times is there's a randomness that you have to put on the grain starting time, or the phase of the sample in the grain, because if you don't have this, what happens is once you overlap the grains, you get artifacts. So other than that, it's basically just the grains fire in a sequence, and what I wanted to do was have a pitch sequencer, so a range of notes, and when the grains fire, they follow the notes that you've dictated in this grid. And so you can use that to if you have the grains overlapping, you've basically got a chord of the notes that you program give you a chord. And if you reduce the overlap so the grains aren't overlapping, then the grains play in like an arpeggio. And depending on the frequency you play them at, it can actually be sort of quite a musical arpeggio. And while that's playing, you can sweep that through the sample and have that evolve. And there's a lot. So that's basically the design I have for SpaceCraft. So that was originally in Reactor. And then with that, I wanted to have a better way of controlling it, because I wanted to. That's where the touchscreen side of things came in. Before I got to the touchscreen, I created an Arduino-based controller that I built onto a floorboard, which is basically two touch strips pressure sensitive touch strips. So I used that as a way to control where the grains would play. And then I went from that to eventually deciding that I wanted to try it on a touch screen. And that's the point at which I discovered Juice.
I see.
So when I found Juice, which SpaceCraft is made in, that was quite a turning point for me, because up until that point I hadn't really considered making a product that I would sell. But as soon as I run the Hello World program in Juice, when I saw that, I just realized immediately that I'm going to make this into something. And so when I was developing it, it was actually initially as a VST, but then I would compile it as an iOS app as well to test the touchscreen functionality. And so the sort of foundation of it has always been VST, and then as it grew, as it became more established on iOS, then all the focus went on the iOS coding, and then recently I've had to make it fully compatible with the VST, and all the different DAWs and the different formats and things.
Yeah, so I have a bunch of questions just from what you were saying. So, first question, just going all the way back to the Reactor, to when you were kind of prototyping and getting curious about these things in Reactor. Were you already developing full time then, or were you just kind of messing around with it, or
when you say developing full time, do you mean? I've never developed full time. It's always just been my spare time thing that I've done.
I see.
It's like it was started off as a hobby, basically.
Okay, so you're fully self-taught. Is that right?
Well, no, because there's the community, like the Juice forum.
Yeah, but I mean in terms of formal training and everything. Like, have you ever gone to school to learn how to code?
No, the coding comes from my job.
Okay.
So I've learned to code as being an engineer. So my job is a spacecraft control systems engineer.
I see.
So I work on interplanetary space science missions.
I see. Interesting.
On spacecraft control systems. So
wow.
There's a huge amount
on actual spacecraft control systems.
Yeah.
Wow.
So the control system that takes the sort of measurements from star trackers and gyros, magnetometers, and decides what the reaction wheels and thrusters are going to do, and controls where the spacecraft goes and what direction it's pointing in.
Whoa.
Essentially, it's called guidance, navigation, and control.
Amazing. And how long have you been doing that for?
Oh, I don't know, 15 years.
Okay.
Something,
okay. Great.
Thereabouts. I don't know.
Wow. Amazing. Wow. And do you primarily code in C++ for your professional job? Or? Okay.
Not in C++. So the main language is MATLAB.
Okay.
You know MATLAB?
Yep. I know MATLAB. Yeah.
So it's what we do is very mathematical. So you can imagine it's basically using coding to design a spacecraft. So you're using it to create analysis scripts and create simulators. And the part that I work in is very the simulator is very important, because you can't actually test a physical spacecraft control system on ground because you don't have zero gravity. So you have to simulate the spacecraft and the dynamics of the spacecraft in space, and all of the sensors. Everything is simulated. Wow. And then the control system you design runs in the simulator.
Wow.
And you use programming for that. You use programming to actually design the control system, the tuning of the controller, and you use it. It's just used for everything.
Wow. And
so,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, so I learned C++ really by using Juice.
I see.
To make spacecraft.
Wow. And how and so what was that like, making the jump into C++? Did you find it difficult, or did you find it a fairly easy jump, having been a developer for a number of years?
I can see why people find it difficult.
Uh-huh.
I'd already done a bit of Java in the past, and I'd touched C in the past as well. But it's the first time I'd properly gone into like the full object-oriented C, and then at the low level using pointers to get the performance.
Yeah.
And C is definitely my favorite language now.
Yeah.
It has been since I started using it for this. I love how you have the object-oriented infrastructure to stop everything getting out of hand with the GUI and also with the DSP. But you can go right down to the low level to get the performance with the actual DSP as well. I just love it.
And what did you find was the most challenging part for you jumping into C++ from MATLAB and the other languages that you used in the past? Would you say that it was memory management or thread management, or?
Well, with things like, I will definitely say this: I'm not a guru programmer. I'm not a sort of. I'm certainly not a guru audio developer programmer. That's for sure. I know the right sort of things that I need to know to get the job done in the most efficient way possible. I'm not an expert on thread safety and all this kind of things, and I think I kind of benefit from. That's one of the benefits from using the Juice framework, because a lot of that's kind of set up for you. You have the sort of processor running in its thread, and then you have the GUI running in its thread.
Yep.
And it's kind of dictated for you. And the thing I do is I try to follow the sort of best practices that I see in the forums.
Yeah.
And I try to use the sort of smart pointers and things like that. And I think it's because of the Juice framework really that I've been able to do this. I just wouldn't have, because it's a thing I've done in my spare time. I just don't think I would have had the time and energy to be able to do this if I didn't have this framework there and everything sort of. It's the foundation really.
Yeah.
So yeah, Juice is incredible. I'm so happy that I used it for this.
Yeah. And I really admire that you were able to kind of get in there and create something and put it out to the world. And I think that there are a lot of developers that they really worry a lot about best practices and about thread safety and about all of these things, and they worry about it so much that they never actually get to creating something and putting it out there into the world, because they're just so concerned about doing the right thing. And I like this approach that you said, that you don't really consider yourself like an expert audio programmer, but yet you've been able to create something that has been used by by some of the most famous sound designers on the planet, and I think that that's really admirable. So I think the point of what I'm trying to say is that it's important for developers to get to creating and to actually making something, and those things like best practices and thread safety, they're all important, but don't let that stop you from actually making something. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think what I would go one step further actually. So something that's worked for me with SpaceCraft is, and it is scary. It's terrifying doing something like this.
Yeah. It's
absolutely terrifying to release a product to like a global market. So eventually you have to be careful. You have to kind of dot the I's and cross the T's, and you have to have the beta testers as well. That's essential.
Yeah.
But what I would say is, in terms of what you were mentioning about to kind of just jump in there and do it,
Yeah.
I found something that works really well for me is to prototype things. Prototype features that you think there's a chance that you might want in the future, and don't try to use a Git branch, and don't think of it as this is the code, this is going to be committed into your repository, or this is going to be merged or anything. Just do a really rough, quick hack, basically, of your idea. Don't worry about the GUI looking good. Don't spend any time. Just get the sort of bare, the essential aspects of it. So the sound works. The sound is the DSP is working, and just get a feel for how feasible it is, really, because a lot of these things can be quite deceiving with features, what hidden issues there are going to be, and also I've found sometimes that some features have been, when they seem very intimidating, like the MPE, for example, that I did, the MPE functionality in SpaceCraft, that was quite intimidating at first, but when I went and just did a really sort of quick and dirty prototype, that helped me realize that this can really happen, and it kind of inspired me to properly do it. So if you take this approach of prototyping something, you have to then go and essentially leave the code, don't use it, just refer back to it, and then implement it properly.
Yeah. That's really good advice. When coding in Reactor, I've never actually coded in Reactor before, but I'm curious, is that C++ as well, or it's a separate scripting language, isn't it?
Well, it might be behind the scenes. It might be C++. I have no idea. But it's essentially like a front end with blocks and wires that you connect the blocks to.
Oh, I see. Kind of like a Max MSP type of.
Yeah, I haven't used Max actually, but I think it would maybe be similar in some ways. And there are lots of different levels to it. So you can work at the high level with ensembles, and you can wire up high level components and things, and you can do a lot just with that. In a way, that's what Reactor Blocks is. Modular part. But then you can go inside the blocks, and you can go right down to very low level, extremely low level code inside these blocks. And it never becomes code. It's always connecting blocks with wires.
Oh,
so
okay.
It's actually, at first it's more inviting in some way if you're not a coder. But it can get a little bit, if you're really ambitious, eventually you get to the point where you think, I'd rather be writing this in C++, you know?
Yeah. And taking the jump from actually having a block that was kind of a granular block in Reactor to actually trying to code this in C++. I mean, I haven't really done a lot of granular synthesis myself, but I mean, I remember in university doing a kind of novice version in Max MSP, and even that was quite challenging just to get all the parts together. How did you find that challenge of getting into actually the DSP side of granular synthesis? Because from what I understand, that's one of the more challenging things to do in DSP is granular synthesis. Would you agree with that, or would you?
Well, I don't know, because that's all I've done in audio DSP, really. So when I did the prototype in Reactor, I actually did code it down to the very lowest level blocks with plus block and minus block. So it's essentially code. It's just with wires and blocks. Reactor Core, I think it's called.
I see.
If I remember correctly. And once I was in C++, you have your process block, which is basically your arrays of floats, and you have your samples, which are larger arrays of floats. And all you have to do is take some of those samples out of the larger arrays of floats, which are your samples, and place them in the process block.
Yeah.
Essentially, at this most simplest level.
Yeah.
And that's what granular synthesis is. Essentially, you've got your sample. You take tiny fragments of audio from the sample, and then you can either be from one location in the sample or from lots of different locations, and then you gather up all of your grains, and then you combine them together. You kind of synthesize them together into a sound.
Yeah.
So the actual concept is quite straightforward.
Yeah. Were you using? I don't want to get too into your kind of secret sauce, but were you using like another audio buffer and just copying it into another buffer, or how were you actually? So you have your sample.
No, it's what did I do? So I have the samples that you load in. Obviously, there's an audio buffer per sample.
Yep.
And there are intermediate each grain object. So I have obviously my grain class, and then I have the grain objects, and there's a certain number of grains per the engine. So there's the top and bottom engine. And then I have arrays of floats that I use as intermediate storage for the data as the grain data are being combined. And then I basically add on top each time with each new grain.
I see.
Actually, that part's not that complex. The thing that is quite complex in spacecraft is how the notes and the grain sequences interact. So you have the notes on the grid, which it follows each note. Essentially, for each grain that fires, a new note is triggered, and it follows the notes based on the order that you've input them in the grid. Also, if you play via MIDI, it follows the input, the order that you play the notes.
I see.
So you've got this a number of notes that you have to cycle through, and a number of grains that you have to cycle through, and they're different numbers of each, and so you have this sort of cycling, distributing algorithm, and that's actually quite complicated.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that the sequence of notes and the sequence of grains may be different, and what that can give you is like an interesting kind of texture in terms of the way that it plays back. Because if you have less grains than notes that need to be played, then the notes are going to fall on a different grain every time. Is that what you're saying, or are you saying something different?
It's a bit hard to explain, actually. Maybe I shouldn't have attempted to explain this.
But let's go back. Let's go back a step, because I'd like to understand just granular synthesis from just maybe a high level overview in terms of so you have a audio buffer that contains the incoming audio, right? And then what you're grabbing is a slice of that. So a slice of that would be a grain, correct?
Yeah. So there are two ways you can do granular synthesis, at least, but two obvious ways are you either have a static sample that's there saved into memory, and so there's no incoming audio per se. You're just grabbing from whatever place in the sample you go to.
Okay.
You want fire the grains, or you can have sort of a granular effect where you have incoming audio, like a streaming buffer.
Yeah.
And you're grabbing from the sample the audio data as it's coming in live.
Yeah. Okay. So with your technique, I remember you have like kind of a window size where you're able to pick out a piece of audio, and then
so there's a panel up in the top left called the grain control panel, where you in spacecraft where you can control the frequency and the length of the grains. Those are the sort of the main controls for the grains. And if you go to the high frequency and longest duration grains, then all the grains are sort of overlapping and playing as fast as possible. So you have the full overlap of all the grains that you can possibly have. Yeah. There's somebody at your door.
Oh, that's my son.
Okay.
Hi. He can't hear you. He's saying hi. Yeah. So you have
Yeah,
going
so
back. Yeah, go
you can
ahead.
go in the top right corner of the grain control panel, and you have the highest frequency of the grains and the largest overlap, and that's the sort of classical granular synthesis sound, where you have this sort of smooth texture that is continuously playing, which captures the essence of the sample at that particular point in the sample.
That's right. So stopping right there. So basically, you have this sample of this section of audio, and then what you're essentially doing is that you're just chopping it into pieces, but playing it in sequence, and then but they're chopped into individual pieces like large grains of.
Yeah, so you can chop any part of the audio into these small grains,
Yeah.
and it can be all from the same part in the audio.
I see.
Can all be from the same time.
I see.
And you play those grains back extremely fast.
Yeah.
And overlap them.
Yeah.
And you get this sort of constant texture which captures the essence of the sound at that point in time.
Yes. Okay, cool. So it can actually even be the same grain in time that's just playing repeatedly and giving you an essence of what the sound is.
Multiple grains, but from the same. They have the similar audio data in them because they're from the same location.
I see.
And then you can play with. You can take grains from a large, spanning a large region. You can grab them from random places, or you can have another thing SpaceCraft has is an LFO which controls the location the grains are played from.
I see.
So that gives you that. It sounds like a scrubbing. You're scrubbing through the sample.
Yeah. Okay, so in terms of the code itself, then what you're doing is that you have your audio buffer, and then with that section in time, and then what you're doing is you're pulling individual sections of floating point numbers and taking them and putting them into another place, which could be, I would think of it as
so ultimately it's going to end up in the process block. So each grain you can essentially print each grain onto what is going to become the process block buffer.
And then from there it's a matter of using different processes, filtering, like you said, LFOs, and to manipulate,
changing the pitch of each grain, and so on.
Wow, amazing.
It's a really powerful technique. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what else is done going forward in granular synthesis. And there's a lot of different. I was fortunate in the fact that granular synthesis is a very sort of wide scope of what it can do. Mm-hmm. So you have some instruments that are focused more on having a huge amount of control over all the details. Mm-hmm. So you can program very intricate sounds, and you can control everything right down to the exact grain window shape. The amplitude envelope, for example, of each grain.
Sure.
And you can have lots of a matrix of modulation with the grains as well.
That's right.
You can go really deep into that.
Wow.
But there's another sort of niche where you can, which is really what the niche that SpaceCraft is trying to fill, where a lot of those things are hard coded for you behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. So I don't give the user the control to change the grain random time variation, or there's very limited control over the grain shape as well. Mm-hmm. And it tries to sort of hard code the things that will hopefully give you a pleasing sound.
Yeah.
So that when you just start playing with it immediately, you don't really need to configure much. You can just explore and get results easily.
Yeah. And do you feel that I would use quotes when I say simplicity, because it doesn't sound very simple, but do you think that hiding away some of those user choices is helpful in people finding appeal in the synthesizer itself?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the user, because SpaceCraft is not for everyone. It's not for the kind of person that has to have control over everything. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And I have been known in the past to be in that sort of mindset, but these days I'm more in a mindset of give me something that I can just quickly play, and without having to worry too much about those things. So there are certainly users that appreciate that sort of opinionated design approach. So those are the guys that I'm sort of trying to appeal to.
Yeah, that's great. And so you decided to initially go with the iOS design, and that was based off of the prototyping that you were doing with the Arduino boards, trying to kind of replicate that behavior using the touchscreen. Is that correct?
Yes, I wanted to. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer for an instrument that is an instrument you want to perform on. If you have the opportunity to use the touch, then it adds this wonderful dimension to it.
Yeah.
So the iOS, I made sure that the VST would, because some people have touchscreen laptops as well, and I made sure that the VST would still be touch compatible.
Yeah.
But also made sure that it still makes sense when using it with a mouse.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have the same tactile exploration feel with the mouse. It's got to be said, but you can certainly do a lot with automation. You can automate one XY pad at a time, and I'm finding the users who've been telling me about their experiences with the VST, they all seem to be talking about using automation and really excited about what you can do when you automate things.
Amazing.
And of course, in a DAW, that's really convenient. If you have the VST, all DAWs are basically ready to go when it comes to automation.
Yeah. And tell me more about how you find your experience releasing SpaceCraft into the iOS scene, because this is a very flourishing area of audio development, and yet of course we have ways that we can record our own music, and obviously it's not as fully fledged as like a DAW that you would have on your desktop like Ableton. So can you tell me just a little bit more about what you or what people that or what your audience find appealable about the mobile making music scene?
Well, I mean, there's a huge interest in this scene. There's a huge. It's not as big as the desktop scene, sure, of course, but there's a certain type of I get the impression that some musicians they want to have this mobile way to make music, so that they can. I see lots of people jamming on SpaceCraft out in the forest or on the beach and things like that, and they take it on holiday with them, or and also they use it to make music anyway. They just completely don't use desktop for anything.
Yeah.
So there's definitely this sort of iOS music community, and I think it's already very well established as well. I mean, if you look on the iOS App Store, there's a huge number of music apps.
Yeah, about 30,000 is what somebody told me. Chris Randall from Audio Damage told me there's
which
about
is
30,000.
Pretty scary as someone who's releasing an app on iOS to sort of. At one point, I searched for granular synthesis after I'd pretty much created SpaceCraft, and then I saw what was there, like Borderlands, Tardigrade. I also saw online about Quanta, which was going to come out shortly, and that was quite a shock, actually. That was quite intimidating to see that.
Yeah, and do you think that part of it is that so you have the mobility aspect, you have the tactile aspect of being able to actually touch the interface rather than needing to use a mouse. So you have the mobile, you have the the tactile aspect, and
Yeah.
then
So I think those are the two sort of main things between the iOS and the desktop market. I think is that iOS has the touch aspect and the mobile aspect,
yeah,
whereas the desktop environment is more sort of established, and it's more sort of everything's there
yeah,
to master a track and to do maybe it's maybe more convenient for making the final track. I don't know. Um,
yeah,
so I think both of they both complement each other. You do ideas, you can create ideas on iOS, and then you can send things to through desktop and then work on the final track that way.
yeah.
I can't comment on the experience of creating a full track in iOS because I haven't actually done that myself.
Yeah, yeah, people do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I hear that.
And so sometime, was it last year or earlier this year that you teamed up with the team at Traction to start looking at
The VST.
the VST, the desktop
Yeah, that was
version?
actually that started last year, and that's been going on for quite a while now. And the guys have been very patient with me. So I just needed to take a certain amount of time to get things ready with a limited amount of time in my spare time that I could spend on it. So it's taken a very long time to get to this stage.
Yeah, going back a step, one thing that I'm curious about is I haven't made an iOS app myself, so or even like really looked into it, but the file system, like file management, like with audio files, and how did you find that adjusting? Because as as you said previously, that you have audio files that you're processing, that you're using for your presets. So how and then with having limited space on the iPad, or did you find that it was a challenge to when you said, okay, I have these audio files, I need to get them. How am I going to manage that?
This is actually a big problem on iOS, I think, for music apps. Because if you want to have an app that works as an AUV3, it's extremely difficult to have files available on the sort of file system that can be seen from outside your app, and also inside your app. So what's been done for SpaceCraft is to have a sort of secure folder that only the AUV3 app can see.
I see.
And also the standalone can see it as well.
Okay. On the
and
cloud.
So the standalone.
I'm sorry. On the hard drive or in the cloud?
Yeah, it's on the hard drive.
Okay.
It's on the hard drive, but it's not something you can access from the iOS Files app. You have to be in SpaceCraft to access this. It's some sort of security feature.
I see.
But it means that the AUV3 app can access the same audio and preset files that the standalone can.
Okay.
And that's the only way to do it. So you can't then go into the Files app and copy files in. You have to go through the SpaceCraft interface and import an audio file and do it that way.
I see.
So it's a bit of an inconvenience really for the user, because if the VST, the desktop, for example, and also the AU on desktop, you have a folder on the computer which is just a folder you can find in Explorer or Finder, which has the audio and the preset files.
Yeah.
And there's none of this.
Yeah.
It's just everything's free to access, so it's specific to iOS,
I see.
which means if someone's using the VST and they want to back up their files, or if they want to add a whole bunch of audio files, they can just go straight to the folder and just do everything in Explorer or Finder.
I see. And other than that, porting your synth from iOS to the desktop, did you find that there were any tricky bits, or was it pretty straightforward, or was it just a matter of recompiling, just setting
No,
up on the
it
desktop?
was a lot of work because
Yeah.
I started off with the VST,
Yeah.
and then I developed an iOS. I started at the very start. I had a VST. That was the very first thing I had.
Yeah.
Hello World VST.
Yeah.
And then I made it into a prototype instrument as a VST, and then I started doing full-on iOS because I knew that this had to be an iOS app. It was a no-brainer.
Sure.
And then as I did that, I still built the VST to test the iOS app. So I was always doing them both in parallel, but the design of things became very iOS oriented.
I see.
To the point where the VST side of things got neglected, and I wasn't testing all of the different conditions on the VST. It was more for prototyping the code and things. Most of the testing was done in iOS.
I see.
So by the time I came to having the VST developed, there was a lot of things that I had to fix that had been neglected because of that. But I had to add some new features for the VST because I had to take advantage of the more processing power you have on desktop, and also the more RAM that you can allocate to the app. So there's a limit on the amount of RAM you can allocate to an AUV3 app. Which means that you can actually get yourself into quite a lot of trouble if you get your app configured in a state where it can't load because it needs too much RAM. You can actually put your app into a state where you can never start it up on iOS, and so that's like the nightmare scenario. It's very restrictive from a RAM point of view.
I see.
I'm not an expert on this area, but I've seen it happen in the past, and I've known to keep the RAM usage very low on iOS. So then for the VST, you've got loads of RAM potentially if the system has it, and you've got more CPU power as well if the system has it. So two optional features that I've included in the VST on launch were to add more grains. So you can have up to 8 times the number of grains, although 8's a bit overkill. I think 2 or 4 times the number of grains is kind of a sweet spot, which allows you to have like a smoother overall granular sound with less sort of noise in the sound. It's a lot of the guys that have tried the desktop and that are already into granular synthesis and have been using it for years. They say that they really love the higher number of grains feature because they can get really sort of professional quality sound from that.
I see.
And the other thing is just to have a larger sample. So the maximum sample duration on the iOS is 2 minutes.
I see.
Whereas on desktop it's up to 16 minutes. So you can load in like a huge amount of audio. You can concatenate your audio samples together and just put them in a huge chunk, and then you have the whole sort of area to explore.
Amazing.
And there are some other features as well that are not currently in the iOS app.
Okay. And so going back to your relationship with Traction, how did that materialize? Did they reach out to you, or did you?
Actually, I've had a lot of really surreal experiences, as I keep saying, getting into audio development, and another one of those was I sent an email to Julian Storer saying thanks for Juice. I posted it on the forum actually. I said thanks for Juice. It's allowed me to do this, release this app, and then he invited me to the. I think first of all he actually invited me to present at an audio developer conference.
At the meetup.
So I found myself after maybe less than a month of releasing on the iOS, I was standing up in front of real audio developers. Like Native Instrument guys were there. Julian Storer was there in the audience. And there was lots of different people and like guys with PhDs in audio field. And then there's me, this guy that's come sort of out of nowhere, who has very little experience in audio development, anything. and I demoed SpaceCraft
Uh-huh.
in front of these guys.
Yeah.
And one of the guys in the audience was Dave Rowland
Yeah.
of Traction. And so that was my first sort of, I connected with loads of people I knew from the forum as well, from that experience, and yeah, that was really wonderful experience, meeting these people. And then after that, I got invited to actually go to see the Rolly offices as well.
Okay.
And I also met some of the guys that work on Juice through that.
Amazing.
So that was a really cool. Like I'm just loving this whole like experience, having all these experiences, you know, and like this podcast as well. This is a really it's a really cool milestone in my journey in audio. Wow. I'm really happy to do this. Yeah. And that's how I got talking to Julian about he gave me the contact with Traction, and then the rest is history.
Nice. And so can you tell us a little bit more about what the situation, what that relationship is like? What is that about?
It's a program called Traction Presents, and they support existing developers to help take their product to market on desktop.
Sure.
And so I already had the iOS out by that point.
Yeah.
But there are things around that there's support in things like authentication and marketing things, the actual store side of things, and general advice on things. The guys in Traction are actually experts in usage of Juice as well.
Yeah.
So like Dave Rowland's a very experienced guy.
Yeah.
And so it's been really glad that I teamed up with these guys to do this, and it's given me it's helped me focus on the actual programming, the changes to SpaceCraft itself that I needed to do. And it's taken away from a lot of the other things that I would have wasted a lot of time doing.
Yeah.
That weren't actually related to the creative part of SpaceCraft. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, a lot of people don't think about those other aspects outside of just making the plugin or making the app, and how much actually has to go into actually bringing that to market, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's when I released the original iOS app, I had to create a website. I had to learn how to use Squarespace and things, because I can do a bit of web design, but I decided that I didn't have time to mess around with that. I just wanted something that would work and just got it out there. I created a whole bunch of social media accounts that I'd never used Twitter or Instagram in my life before then. I created those accounts just for this, and I learned how to do all of that thing. I've learned how to do. I've made some videos. I created the promo, not the promo video, the demo video for Traction that's on the website for the VST with the patch demo. I did the part of that, and then I sent some of the inputs to Traction, and then he sort of put it all together. That's the sort of thing that they've supported me with. There's a lot of things that you have to do behind the scenes that are not actually directly connected to the coding, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And also the support as well. Like you put an app out or a plugin, and you start getting these. I haven't had any for the VST yet, but I did have quite a few, bug reports and things for the iOS app before it came out.
Sure.
So there's a lot of. It doesn't stop when you release it. You just keep going, and you keep solving those kind of problems. You have to, when users contact you, if you're able to, you should sort of help them with their problems.
Yeah.
And with the amount of contact I've had in that way, I've been able to be sort of a one-to-one help for people, and I've really enjoyed doing that. I mean, I only have the one product, so that it's kind of still feasible in that way. So there's that side of it as well.
Nice. And that kind of jumps into you as an audio developer and with your own company, Delta V, is that right?
Delta V Audio, yeah.
Yeah, Delta V Audio. And so what are your plans in the future with SpaceCraft and just kind of heading forward as an independent audio developer? Is this something that you want to start taking more seriously, or is it something that's going to remain more of a hobby for you that you're going to do as a sideline?
Well, it's going to be. I mean, I work in space industry, and I love my job. I get to work on missions to the sun, to Mars, to Lagrange points,
Sure.
doing interplanetary science and Earth observation missions. I mean, this is my sort of career.
Yeah.
But I feel that I can do this. I can keep doing this in the way that I've been doing it, and I can keep improving spacecraft when I get the chance to. And there are things that I still want to do to improve spacecraft. Most of it is there, but there's some things that are gonna finish it off and make it sort of a complete instrument. So I'm gonna keep doing that. I'm also eventually gonna have an Android version out as well.
Amazing.
Because that's actually been in beta for 3 or 4 months now, I think. It's just been sitting there. I haven't looked at it for ages. I didn't do any updates. Just one beta.
Yeah.
See what happens. So I've got some problems to iron out on that one at some point. But that's. I really hope that gets that comes out sometime this year.
Amazing.
In terms of other projects, I've no idea.
Okay.
I'm just my main focus is finish spacecraft to the level that I want it to be, and obviously support it going forward, because it's my baby.
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't know what, in terms of audio stuff, I don't know what's going to happen after that. I'm just going to play it by ear.
Sure. And do you, as an independent audio developer, do you have any pieces of advice that you'd like to pass on to other independent audio developers? It can be kind of a... Well, 1 second before you answer, 1 second before you answer that, my dogs are going crazy again. All right, I'm back. Let me ask that again. So, do you have any advice that you'd like to offer for?
I actually do. Yeah. I have some humble advice from a guy that is very much indie developer. So there are established companies, and there are indie developers. And when I say established companies, I mean companies that can actually make a proper living from this. And they have like multiple apps. They have like really well-known brands, and if you're an indie developer, you can't imagine that you're going to be that in this massively saturated marketplace. You're not going to come in and become, an audio damage from the start. So what I would say is, don't do this. Have a day job, basically. Have a job, and don't rely on this to make money to, survive. It's saying that it's an incredible thing. It is an absolutely. It's such a wonderful experience to do it. It's scary as hell. It's terrifying, and it's a total roller coaster. And it's one of the most exciting things I've ever done. And but it's not going to make you rich overnight. It's something that you should expect to do in your spare time, I think, as an indie developer. And it's something that, because of that, you can't underestimate the amount of work and strain that will put on you, especially if you want to get something done fast, So you have to pace yourself. You have to be sensible, and you have to have the responsibilities of your job and be very careful with the amount that you do on top of that. And that's going to mean it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot longer than you would like it to get the results that you want. And so, pace yourself, basically. And if you can get to the end and you can get something that you can put out, then it's a hell of a ride, that's for sure. Yeah. It's a hell of an experience. It's so exciting. And you will meet people that you've heard of. I've been chatting with like artists that I've been listening to all my life, and then they say, "Oh, I love your instrument," and I've been chatting to them on Instagram and things, and messaging, and they're using it. And to see people use your actual instrument in their music, that's the most exciting thing of all, really.
Yeah.
Is to follow all of that. So another couple of things I would say is beta testers are so important for this. I've had the most amazing beta testers supporting me through the whole thing. I've had people that have volunteered from various places, a lot of them from the Audio Bus forum, actually, and they've been very indispensable for me to get the quality to where I need it to be for the iOS, but also for the VST as well. Because there's just no way that you can you can know what to test for all of the different variables and all the different ways people will use your instrument. So look after your beta testers. Make life as easy for them as you possibly can. If they come to you with a problem they found, don't be defensive or anything. Just try to understand what it is. Be very and be grateful for what they're doing, because they're doing something for free. You know, it's a very just look after them, basically.
Yeah.
And another thing I would say is, if you're going to do an app or a plugin, don't be afraid of social media. Or at least if you are, just ignore that anyway and just use social media. Use Instagram, for example, and sort of have a presence with that, because at least from my experience, I think that's had a huge impact on how much
reach
it's had. Yeah, reach.
Amazing. Great. Well, I think that's fantastic advice, and I really appreciate you for coming on to the show and sharing and giving advice that I think a lot of people are going to find very useful.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah,
it's been really cool.
Yeah, it's been awesome. Is there anything else that you'd like to say? Any links that you'd like to put out? Where can we actually go and get SpaceCraft?
Okay, so the iOS app is on the App Store, iOS App Store.
Yeah.
The just search for SpaceCraft Granular Synth, and the VST. So it's on VST 2 and 3, and also AU on Mac.
Okay.
And you can go to traction.com, and you'll see SpaceCraft on there. So just go to traction.com.
Amazing.
Traction with a K.
Yes. Great stuff. A big shout out to the Traction team, Dave Rowland.
Shout out Traction, yeah.
Yeah. Shout out to Traction. You're doing great things. Thanks a lot, Mark, for coming on the show and sharing with us. That's a lot of great insight.
You're very welcome.
And we'll have to catch up for a pint when I'm in London or something.
Let's do that, man. Sounds good.
Great. Well, thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
Brilliant. Thank you.